I'd now like to invite our next speakers, Jay Glacier, Associate University Librarian at La Trobe University, and Hugh Rundle, Manager Digital Discovery, also at La Trobe University, who will be presenting on La Trobe's Digital and Free project.
Hello. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, I can.
Yes, excellent. Hi, I'm Hugh. It's actually just me today.
No worries.
Let me just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see a slide that says digital and free.
We can, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so hi, I'm Hugh Rundle. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri lands today, just down the road from the beautiful Burrarong River. And I was born on Palawa land under the snowy mountaintops of Kinunyi in Hobart. I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As I just said, Jay can't join us today. She volunteered me to help her with his presentation and then dipped out. So hopefully it will still be interesting to you. So La Trobe's Digital and Free initiative seeks to shift as many prescribed subject readings as possible to digital formats that are accessible at no cost to students. So today I'm going to outline the context for why La Trobe's focusing our efforts on that initiative, how it works and how we use Talis Aspire data as part of the process, how we've used an iterative approach and how you can learn from our mistakes and what we're focusing on in the coming year. So originally this was an emergency response to COVID-19 lockdowns, with most of our students restricted to 5 kilometres from their house for weeks on end. You probably all remember. And we focused on the subjects that were being taught at the time where students desperately needed access to course readings in an online learning context. So this was a process of manually checking reading lists, looking to see if there were ebooks or other online equivalents, and we had a shared spreadsheet that tracked 2 things. Firstly, whether subjects had been checked, and secondly, some basic information about the status of the reading list. But by the end of 2021, we'd been doing this for a little while, and we realised we really needed to become a bit more sophisticated in how we're managing our data, how we're tracking what needed to be done and scheduling the work. And our learning services team were pretty frustrated that they seemed to be checking the same lists over and over without a very good way to really focus our efforts on the subjects and readings that would have the most impact. So last year, we looked at an improved way to manage our data, and that was helped by a new organisational structure with a dedicated reading lists and resource sharing team, and a lot of them are here today. And that was the point where we really began to fold in the lessons and the activities from Digital and Free into our day-to-day work and the way our library teams kind of see their work as well. So it became more of a description of how we approach our work with reading lists rather than being a special project. It wasn't a reaction anymore to a sudden and hopefully temporary change in teaching modes. Digital and Free is really very clearly aligned to La Trobe's strategic vision and our institutional values. So we've got a new strategic plan at the university from 2020 to 2030, and that's absolutely shaped by the COVID-19 world. It really emphasises online and blended learning modes, like I imagine most other universities' strategies now do. It's a big focus on student accessibility and equity and quality digital experiences. And we've also got an historic institutional commitment at La Trobe to progressing social equity and opening up higher education to people who wouldn't traditionally have that opportunity. Which brings us to the scandalous university textbook market. So you all know textbooks are expensive and students are frequently shocked by the cost. So students often either purchase these expensive textbooks and go without other life essentials, or they don't purchase them and then they suffer academically as a result. And there's a couple of studies just quickly that really highlight how dire this is. So there was a 2019 study of students receiving various Centrelink support payments that showed that more than 80% struggled with costs for essential study items and course fees, and over 35% had to withdraw from studies because of the financial stress. And then on the right, you'll see some numbers from a 2018 survey of more than 21,000 students at colleges and universities in Florida. That found that 64% of students didn't even buy the required textbook. Nearly 43% took fewer courses because of textbook costs. Nearly 36% said the high cost caused them to earn a poor grade, presumably because they didn't buy the textbook. And nearly 23% said they had to drop a course. So this is obviously very bad for students. It's very bad for social equity, and it's also very bad for universities if they want to retain and graduate students. So it's that combination of the online delivery of learning and teaching and the need to make access to required readings more equitable that led us to call the initiative digital and free. So we've basically got three goals ultimately. Firstly, all students can access their prescribed readings online from anywhere. That's the digital bit. Students don't have to pay to purchase or access their subject readings. That's the free bit. But importantly, kind of added this a little bit after we first started, to be honest. We need to make sure that subject readings are high quality and easy to access at any time during the teaching period. I'll come back to that later. You're probably wondering how it works, so here we go. So digital and free is a multi-team approach to subject readings using a whole range of methods and strategies. And I'm presenting today because I led a lot of the project last year, but the actual day-to-day work is spread across a very large number of library staff from multiple teams. Some of those people are here today, so big shout out to them. They were really doing the actual work. I was just asking them for reports most of the time. But roughly speaking, our work falls into three connected and overlapping realms. So I think about this as there's procurement and data, there's liaison and advocacy, and there's open education. And you can see on the screen a small part of a very complex workflow diagram I made to help us think about how the multiple teams and individuals needed to work together to achieve what maybe sounds like three very simple goals, but it's pretty complicated to actually make it happen in the real world. So I'll run you through, not the very complicated diagram, but kind of basically how it all works. So procurement and data is managed almost entirely by our reading lists and resource sharing team. So they use Talis's file exports from Aspire, as well as some data from Advanced NIS. And we can connect that to Power BI to do database queries, create custom reports, and filter it all down. And then we can kind of see things like the proportion of lists with print items broken down by school. We keep our data sets as clean as we can by refreshing our subject hierarchy every quarter using, I think it's every quarter, Jamie might correct me there, using an export from our course management system. So we've always got the latest set of subjects aligned to the current schools within the university. And then our reading list and resource sharing team will work with 6 different data sets, which you can see on your screen there, to inform their work. So the new subjects approved list comes out of CourseLoop, which is our course management software. And that tells our team about any newly approved subjects. So they can either check that maybe there's already a list in Talis, but if it's a new subject, there probably isn't. So they'll create a new empty list, and then the relevant people will contact the subject coordinator about that list as soon as we know about it, which is often well before it's actually being taught. We then have a print prescribed list, which comes out of Talis. That's a different fortnightly report, which we run through Power BI, and that provides a list of all of the prescribed readings that are only available in print. Our team check those to see if we can purchase or subscribe to an ebook or a digital version, some other digital version of the same title, or maybe we can digitize assigned chapters, legally using our normal kind of copyright compliant processes. If they're not able to do that, then a library note is added saying no ebook with the date that we last checked. And then that allows us to run a different report which filters to find all of those items that have no ebook library notes. And then they provide that list to, the Reading Lists and Resource Sharing team provide that list to our Learning Services team. And they start a conversation with our subject coordinators, the academics, to see if we can convince them to assign a different reading that is available online. So that report marks the point where the work passes from the Reading Lists team to the Learning Services team. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Then we have the Talis Subjects Flipped report, which is sort of a Latrobeism. So that uses Talis data in Power BI to keep track of the number of reading lists that we've flipped from containing some print in prescribed or pre-reading to being entirely digital for those categories. And we break that down by school. La Trobe doesn't have faculties or colleges. It's a pretty flat hierarchy now. So we just break that down by school. And one of the things I hadn't anticipated, but it's sort of obvious now, is that sometimes a list can regress. So originally we were sort of thinking, oh, well, we'll just go, subject by subject, and then eventually we'll have done everything. But just because the list's entirely digital this semester doesn't mean it won't have a print item added by an academic next semester, or even halfway through the semester, to be honest. So this unflipped report tracks any movements in the other direction so that we don't get confused between what we flipped to digital and how many lists still are digital, which isn't the same number. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the last one is the dollar save for students report. That's a really important report for us, but it's quite fiddly to create. And this is a list of all the print readings that were flipped by the Reading Lists team, where we found an ebook or digitized chapter to replace the same title in print. So it's a fairly basic calculation. We just say how many students were enrolled in the subject, what's the retail price of the book, we multiply the first by the second number, and that tells us how much money we save for students, on the assumption that they all would have bought the textbook, which we kind of know they wouldn't, but that's really the only assumption we can make. However, it is worth noting that this is probably an underestimate because it doesn't count any of the readings where a learning service team convinced the subject coordinator to replace the text completely with a different title. So just counting the stuff that our Reading Lists team flipped, we saved a little bit over $500,000 for La Trobe students last year, which was pretty exciting. Okay, so the other bit is liaison and advocacy, and our learning services team have a very crucial role in digital and free because it's usually them who are talking directly to the subject coordinators. So they've got two main tasks when it comes to this. The first task is quite important, which is to check that the data in Talis is actually accurate. So, these readings say they're prescribed, but are they really prescribed? Or did the academic not quite understand the difference between prescribed and required? Are they actually just additional context? Is this actually the full reading list? Maybe there's other readings that haven't made it into the list. So that's the first thing, actually check that the data is accurate. And then secondly, gauging the academic's openness to alternative titles if we've got print in the list, and making some suggestions. Now, ideally, we want to push for open education and resources, but they're not always available for all subjects, might not be appropriate texts. Maybe the academic's just super not interested in OERs. So the various alternatives that we sort of could suggest might be a digital subscription to a different title, some free to read material that's just available on the web, just sometimes appropriate, or ideally fully open educational resources. And then there's a different role around advocacy at a different level for our very senior library staff. And they advocate to deans, deputy vice chancellors, associate deans of learning and teaching, all those important people, to explain what we're trying to do, why, and asking them to use their influence with the academic teaching staff. So I've mentioned OERs a couple of times. This is an area where La Trobe's done a lot of work predating the Digital and Free project. But as we developed our thinking, we realised that our OER work and our Digital and Free initiative are very, very connected. And in some ways, they're kind of symbiotic. So the Digital and Free project has actually influenced a lot how we think about OER in the library. So, as you're not sure, open educational resources are learning materials that are free to read and also openly licensed for free distribution and reuse in derivative works, which is quite important. They're not simply, free to read the way most people think about OERs. And our coordinator for open education and scholarships worked with our learning services team to develop their knowledge and confidence around sourcing, selecting, and promoting open educational resources when they talk to the academic subject coordinators. OERs don't have huge marketing budgets like commercial textbook publishers, so it's really, really important work for us to use our opportunities to push the value. We also publish open texts by La Trobe authors for La Trobe subjects through something called the La Trobe e-Bureau. It's our open texts publishing house, basically, which is run by the library. And why don't you write your own textbook certainly isn't our first suggestion to busy subject coordinators, but it is part of our long-term strategy for digital and free. And I'll talk a little bit more about that right at the end. So ultimately, OERs are the best solution for the iniquities of the commercial textbook market, in my view. But we're alive to the reality we live in. So, we'll try our best with that work, but it's got to be supplemented by a willingness to subscribe to commercial texts or, all of the sort of typical, more traditional, I guess, ways of finding appropriate teaching texts. Okay, not too bad. So, if you're a visual thinker, you're probably hanging out for a diagram, so I made one for you. I've resisted the urge to show you my very complex workflow diagrams because they won't really make a lot of sense in the time we've got available today, but this is a very extremely simplified version of the process that I've just described. Now, the important thing about this is that you can see it's a circular process. It's not a linear one. And I think that was kind of, when we realized it was circular, that was when this really started to work quite well. So we use the data we've got from Talis Aspire, Course Loop, our own records of conversations with academics, and that focuses our conversations with the course coordinators and any other decision makers. Our learning services team are supported with customized advice and help from our open education team. They also work in collaboration with individual academics to publish their own OERs sometimes for use back into the reading lists. And from all of those conversations with academics, then changes are made to the subject readings, and that gets reflected in the data. And then that data goes into the next cycle. So this is just an endless cycle. And changing our thinking about this to a circular iterative thing rather than a one-off linear project that would end has really helped us to think a little bit more sustainably and a bit more long-term. So this has been, as I said, an iterative journey for La Trobe, and we made a few mistakes. So I thought I might share some tips to help you avoid making the same ones if you're interested in going down this road. So the first thing is to take time to clarify what you really want to know. Initially, we recorded only which subjects a library team member had checked and whether the reading list contained any print items. So we thought we wanted to know something like how many subjects have we checked and how many are 100% digital, which was useful, but later that caused problems because we hadn't distinguished between all the different reasons a list might not have any print. So did we actually take any action to flip things to all digital? Or was the list already 100% digital? Was there no reading list at all for the subject? Our spreadsheet at that stage didn't really tell us. So it made it quite difficult to, first of all, to determine what impact our work had had, but also to know what the obvious next step was for the highest value. Second thing is to ensure everyone's got the same understanding of your terms and your goals. This is super important. So we had some difficulties midway through the project when we realized we hadn't defined our terms. So were we tracking lists or were we tracking subjects? Because some lists are used by multiple subjects and some subjects have multiple reading lists for, obscure administrative reasons. So if this person thinks that they're tracking lists and this person thinks they're tracking subjects, most of the time that will be the same thing, but it won't always, and then that muddies the waters. So it's really important to know what you're all talking about and make sure you're all talking about the same thing when you use the same words. Another example of this is the dollars saved for students list. So there was some confusion about this because it sounds like it represents the dollars saved by all the work done by the library. However, we were not tracking dollars saved by course coordinators changing to a different digital text. In fact, we're kind of not really now. So it only represents dollars saved by our reading lists team finding digital versions of the original assigned text. And that's basically because it's really, really difficult to keep track of academics changing the title, and it's much simpler to keep track of the work that our own team's doing. And the last thing which we've learned now is to set priorities rather than targets. And that's related to the first point about being clear about what it is you want to know. You also need to be very clear about what your goals actually are. So initially, we thought about digital and free being us getting all prescribed readings in all subjects to be digital and free. But that's incredibly unrealistic, and it's also actually not a very sensible goal. So if we've got some incredibly intransigent publishers, even if we could convince them to make a title digital just for La Trobe, the price would be astronomical. But also, there's just some situations where print's a more sensible format. So we teach open education at La Trobe. Field guides for open ed kind of need to be print. It's not that useful if you're expecting people to carry, a laptop around or something while they're out in the field. If you're teaching modern literature, you've got a bunch of $30 paperback novels. That's actually a much smarter delivery model than trying to read them as ebooks on some horrible platform. So we really need to be sensible about this. So now we're using the data we collect as a way to determine where's the next best place for us to focus our efforts rather than what is the arbitrary target we set for people to hit. So I know I'm running out of time. So lastly, what's next? So a few things, three main things that are probably the next focus. The first we're close to actually, which is pulling in retail textbook price, that is the cost to students, to combine with our other reports. And that will help us to get a really clear picture of basically what are the most expensive subjects and disciplines from a student point of view. And we can use that to think about where's the best place to target our efforts. Second thing is targeting, related to that, targeting disciplines and subjects for eBureau OER publications. So looking at things like where are the really large cohort subjects. So for us, that's probably nursing, or really expensive subjects or disciplines, which might be something like law. And the last thing, which we started to look at last year, but we'll probably spend more effort on this year, is what you might think of as digital and inaccessible. So we can move from print to a digital platform, so some subscription platform, but some of those platforms have a very bad user experience for the students. They've got limitations on downloads, or they've got wacky login processes, various things like that. So kind of creating a bit of a hit list of what are the worst online experiences for online textbooks, and seeing if we can shift those onto, even if it's another subscription platform, something that's a bit more user-friendly. So thanks for listening. Hopefully I've left some time for questions, and hopefully that was interesting. If you want to get in touch outside of this, my email's on the screen, and I'm happy to take any other questions.